It is completely dark. Not the kind of dark where your eyes adjust, the kind where they never do. But this young man has gotten used to it. He moves through a passage barely wider than his shoulders, scraping the earth on both sides. The air is thick with the smell of wet clay, rot, gunpowder, and something else. Something he has stopped trying to identify. He moves without a torch. He has memorized every turn. Left at the junction near the collapsed room. Right where the air gets colder. Straight through the section that always smells of rain. Above him, the ground shakes. He presses himself flat against the tunnel floor, cheek against the dirt, and waits. Another strike. Closer. A fine rain of red soil falls from the ceiling and coats his hair. He does not move. The shaking stops. He waits 5 more seconds, then pushes forward. Ahead, through the darkness, there's a glimmer of light. He is almost home. He thinks about his people, whom he's leaving behind. But what he does not know, what none of them know yet, is that less than 2 kilometers away, 30 American soldiers have orders and enough firepower to destroy everything underground. And they're coming directly for him. Before the Americans targeted Vietnam, there were the French invaders years prior. The Vietnamese had already learned one fundamental truth about the land they lived on. Cu Chi's red clay soil was uniquely, almost impossibly, dense, compact enough to hold weight, resistant to collapse, almost impossible to flood. It may not be a good place to farm, but it's the perfect place to hide. The first tunnels in Cu Chi were dug during the war against the French colonials in the late 1940s. They were crude at first, simple hiding places for Viet Minh guerrillas moving weapons and people across contested ground. But the French eventually left, and the tunnels, rather than being abandoned, were quietly expanded. In 1954, Vietnam split into North and South. By 1960, the National Liberation Front, known to most of the world as Viet Cong, began organizing resistance against the American-backed South Vietnamese government. They inherited something extraordinary: a skeleton of a land. A few hundred kilometers of connected passages, rooms, and dead ends running beneath the jungle floor of Cu Chi, ready to be transformed. With that, thousands of people joined hands as one last resort. They started digging. The tunnels would eventually stretch over 250 kilometers, 3 levels deep in some sections. The deepest chambers sat 9 meters below the surface, far enough underground to survive the kind of aerial bombardment that leveled everything above. And inside those walls, an entire world was taking shape. An 18-year-old girl has been underground for 11 days. Her entire day spent digging, carrying, and barely sleeping. She has stopped thinking about sunlight. It's just not useful right now. The tunnel system she moves through is not a trench. Hospitals, kitchens, weapons factories, printing presses, even a theater. It's an entire city down there. The girl has memorized all 62 trapdoor locations on her assigned route. She doesn't think of this as remarkable. She thinks of it as surviving. Above her, a C-130 transport plane turns toward Tan Son Nhut Air Base, carrying the 1st Battalion of the 25th Infantry Division from Hawaii. They have been told they are going to liberate Cu Chi, but they have no idea what's underneath it. The 25th Infantry Division set up their base camp directly on top of the tunnel system. This was not a coincidence on the part of the Viet Cong. The tunnels beneath what would become the American base had been reinforced for years. The Americans would build above ground. The fighters below would listen to their footsteps, eavesdrop on their radio communications through gaps in the soil, and emerge at night to sabotage, gather intelligence, and disappear before dawn. For the American soldiers arriving in early 1966, Kulchi felt alien in a way they couldn't name. The jungle was even stranger. Trails appeared and vanished. Punji stake traps, sharpened bamboo covered with a thin mat of brush, collapsed under boots without warning. Grenades arrived from directions that made no tactical sense. A soldier would step off a path, there'd be a soft click beneath his foot, and the ground would seem to simply take him. He doesn't die. He disappears. A month later, Sergeant First Class Stewart drops down into the first confirmed tunnel entrance, flashlight and pistol in hand. He lasts 4 minutes. His report to his commanding officer contains one harrowing sentence.
There is no bottom to this thing.
The military response is immediate, and in retrospect, almost entirely wrong. Operation Crimp is the first major joint American-Australian attempt to destroy the tunnel network. 8,000 troops, airstrikes, chemical defoliants sprayed over the jungle canopy. Below ground, the young woman presses herself into a reinforced side chamber and listens to the ceiling groan and collapse. The horror lasts 11 whole days. Several hundred meters of passage destroyed, document caches captured, including detailed maps of Viet Cong tunnel layouts across the entire Cu Chi district. In Saigon, the operation is declared a success. 3 days later, the young woman is digging again, a new tunnel pushing northeast toward a section of jungle the operation didn't reach. They have already begun to repair what was destroyed. For her people, this is all they have. All they know is to dig. This was their ground, their life. Over the next year, the Americans eventually understood that airstrikes and infantry sweeps alone couldn't win. They had to go underground. The men who did this were called tunnel rats. Young men went in with a flashlight, a .38 caliber revolver, and a knife. Sometimes a length of rope tied to the ankle so someone above could pull them out if they stopped responding. A tunnel rat starts moving through the dark tunnels. He has been in Vietnam for 6 weeks and underground for most of the last 4 days. His flashlight is off. Tunnel rats learned quickly that a flashlight ahead of you turned you into a silhouette for anyone waiting in the dark. He moves by touch and sound. Left hand trailing the tunnel wall, right hand forward, revolver first. The tunnel turns. He feels it before he reaches the corner. There's a slight change in the air. It's warmer. Someone was here recently. He rounds the corner. A shot is fired. For months, this was the norm. In the absolute dark, 2 men would sometimes pass within inches of each other, neither one breathing, each one convinced the other hadn't noticed him. Other times, the tunnel simply ended in a pit trap, and the men who entered it didn't come back up. The tunnel rats documented their experiences in terse, factual after-action reports that somehow managed to convey the particular unreality of fighting a war underground, of moving through man-made darkness with the weight of the earth above you, hunting a person who knew every inch of the space you were both in, of being the invader in someone else's underground city. The helicopters come without warning, 60 of them, materializing out of the early morning haze, surrounding the village of Ben Suk before anyone on the ground has time to process what is happening. This is Operation Cedar Falls. Their objective is not just to find the tunnels. It is to physically remove the entire civilian population from the Iron Triangle. The stretch of jungle around Cu Chi that American military planners have come to regard as the single most dangerous patch of ground in South Vietnam, and then destroy everything that remains. Then Suk, a village of 6,000 people, is evacuated at gunpoint in a single morning. Everything they cannot carry is left behind. 3 days later, U.S. Army engineers detonate Ben Suk. The village ceases to exist. Operation Cedar Falls finds the hospitals, weapons caches, printing equipment, and food stores. The documents recovered provide the most detailed intelligence picture of the Viet Cong command structure yet assembled. And then, the operation ends. The fighters who had gone deeper underground during Cedar Falls begin moving back to their positions. 2 months after Cedar Falls concluded, the Cu Chi tunnel network is still intact. The Americans know this. Back down in the tunnels, a gray-haired man sleeps on a reed mat in a room no larger than a generous closet. He's been living underground for 3 years. He remembers the first time he went down. The way the air changed, thicker, cooler, with a particular mineral smell he has since come to associate with safety. The way his eyes adapted over weeks until he could move through passages with almost no light, reading the darkness the way he once read the sky for weather. Life underground had its own rhythms. Meals were cooked in the early morning. Water was carried in from covered underground cisterns. Disease was constant. Malaria, dysentery, fungal infections that spread in the permanent dampness. The underground hospitals operated without reliable electricity, without adequate antibiotics, often by the light of a single lamp. People fell in love underground. Arguments broke out. Children were born. People died from their wounds. Their bodies carried out at night to burial sites in the jungle above. There was a school in one section of the tunnels, a carved-out room with a chalkboard scratched into the clay wall, where a teacher ran lessons for the children of fighters who could not surface. The man on the reed mat looks at the photograph on his wall. His daughter, 8 years old now. She has never lived above ground. When ground operations failed to destroy the tunnel system, the Americans escalated to something that had no precedent in the history of warfare. Operation Ranch Hand had already stripped the jungle of its canopy across large sections of Cu Chi, using Agent Orange and other chemical defoliants to eliminate the tree cover that gave the tunnel network its concealment from the air. Then came the B-52s. They began hitting Cu Chi with a frequency and tonnage that defies easy comprehension. A single B-52 carried up to 30 tons of bombs. The missions typically involved multiple aircraft designed not just to destroy structures, but to pulverize the soil entirely. The man on the reed mat wakes up. He has been awake for 3 days. Around him, the tunnel system is alive in a way it hasn't been in months. He is a mid-level commander in the 7th Cu Chi Battalion. He has been in these tunnels, with brief exceptions, for 4 years. Tonight, the exceptions end. The Tet Offensive, named for the Vietnamese New Year, launches simultaneously across more than 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam in the early hours of January 30th, 1968. It is the largest military operation of the Vietnam War. The attacks are repelled across almost every location within days. The expected popular uprising of the South Vietnamese civilian population does not materialize. Casualties among the attacking forces are devastating. Some estimates place Viet Cong losses during Tet at 40,000 fighters killed. The Cu Chi battalions that surfaced that night take severe losses. But Tet does something that military victory cannot undo. It breaks American confidence in the war. Not on the battlefield, in living rooms, on television screens, in the realization that the war was not being won, that the tunnels were still there, that after 8,000 sorties, 30,000 troops, B-52 strikes, chemical defoliants, tunnel rats, and the most technologically advanced military in human history, a network of hand-dug passages in red clay soil was still operational, still full of people. The woman is 22 now. She sits with her back against a tunnel wall and does not move for a long time. She is calculating something that people underground learn to calculate constantly. What is left? Food, water, fighters, time. Her brother is dead. He was killed in a tunnel collapse during a strike 8 months ago. The school teacher who ran lessons in the carved-out room was killed in a tunnel rat engagement the spring before that. The man she worked alongside for 3 years, the one who could navigate the entire system blindfolded, surfaced one morning in 1969, and she never saw him come back down. The war was changing above ground in ways that slowly changed the world below. American troop numbers peaked in 1969 at over 500,000 and then began a deliberate withdrawal under Nixon's Vietnamization policy, the gradual transfer of combat responsibility to the South Vietnamese military. By 1972, most American ground forces had left Vietnam, but that doesn't mean that the bombing stopped. In 1972, Operation Linebacker brought the heaviest sustained air campaign of the entire war, targeting not just the South, but North Vietnamese supply lines, rail networks, and harbor infrastructure in a final furious attempt to force a negotiated settlement. But the tunnels continued to function. Not as it once had. The population underground was a fraction of its peak. The city was largely gone, destroyed, or abandoned. What remained was leaner, harder, stripped down to its essential purpose: survival. The Paris Peace Accords are signed. American combat involvement in Vietnam formally ends. The war between North and South Vietnam continues for 2 more years without American troops on the ground. The tunnels remain operational. The people in them remain in them. Underground, the woman is 30 years old. Above her, the sounds of the war are ending. Not with a single explosion or a moment of clarity, but with a kind of unraveling. Radio transmissions becoming fragmented, the particular acoustic signature of the jungle when the artillery stops, and the silence that follows is not waiting, but finished. On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces enter Saigon. South Vietnam ceases to exist. The Vietnam War, 30 years of near-continuous conflict, is over. The woman climbs a tunnel shaft for the last time. She surfaces into daylight so bright it takes several seconds before she can open her eyes fully. She does not know what the world above looks like now, but she is about to find out. The tunnel system beneath Cu Chi still exists. 120 kilometers have been preserved and open to visitors. The tunnels have been widened slightly to accommodate people who were not, as one historian noted, raised on a wartime diet. The booby traps have been disarmed. The trap doors are now opened and closed for demonstration purposes. Every year, roughly 1 million people descend into the red clay of Cu Chi to walk through the world that was built there. Most of them say some version of the same thing afterward, that they couldn't have survived it. Not the fear, though the fear is real. Even in a tunnel that is safe and lit and has a gift shop at the other end. Not the darkness or the narrowness or the smell, but the time. The Cu Chi tunnels were not built by generals or engineers. They were built by ordinary people with baskets and short-handled hoes, working in shifts, moving one load of red clay at a time through darkness that never changed. 250 kilometers, dug by hand, beneath a war. The ground remembers, even when everyone who dug it is gone.